welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I'm your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And this week, we are talking about everyone's favorite zany superhero, because he's got the chimichangas, and he breaks the fourth wall, and he does all sorts of wacky, crazy stuff that the kids just love and eat it up. It's Deadpool 2.
That was probably, the greatest, 30-second summation of Deadpool, the concept I've ever heard. That's it. No need for any more movies. We got it. We get it. Time to go home.
The zeitgeist has been summarized. The podcast is over. Good night, everybody. But yeah, so we're talking about Deadpool 2. I'm gonna let Jackson kind of preface his takes on this, because I feel like we're gonna kind of bounce off each other a little bit here. We've got a lot to say based on expectations and what we understand of the Deadpool mythos and zeitgeist. So take it away. Tell us about Deadpool 2.
Yeah, we're coming at this from a bit of a different perspective, to say the least. And it's funny that we kind of come to the same conclusion, but for pretty different reasons, it sounds like. Because mostly, Deadpool 2, we sort of mentioned at the end of the last episode, I was worried about it being a Kingsman 2 sort of comedy action sequel that tries too hard, just pumps up everything without understanding what made the original good or funny. And this movie was kind of that, but also not really. It didn't feel like it was trying to outdo Deadpool 1 in the grossness or anything, which I appreciated. But overall, just felt weirdly perfunctory to me a lot of the times. They just made an X-Men movie and put Deadpool in it. A lot of it is played very straight face. There's a lot of weird tone stuff. And I guess for the record, it's not quite the same situation, because Kingsman 1, I loved Kingsman 1. So, Kingsman 2, coming into it, it was a big old disappointment. I liked Deadpool 1, but it was more of a pleasantly surprised kind of because it wasn't the kind of movie that I anticipated myself enjoying. I didn't really have a lot of interaction with the Deadpool character outside of, memes and sort of the cultural idea that Sean summed up so nicely. And that's basically how I had seen it. I'm there's no way this movie is gonna be any good. It's just gonna be edgelord crap. And it was, but it was very but it was well made edgelord crap. It was exactly as trashy as it needed to be. And also, I think it just came out at a really good time where the whole superhero movie genre had gotten stale, because there were really only two styles. There was the very sanitized Disney Marvel assembly line productions, and then there were the big grim and gritty messy DC movies. I guess at the time, only Man of Steel would have been out if that was 2015. Anyway, but either way, it just
the idea of DC was set at that point.
Yeah, because the grim and gritty DC thing, dates back to Batman Begins at this point. Even if there is like the Marvel movies, there is a spectrum of quality there. But the thing about Deadpool 1 was just that even though it wasn't groundbreaking or spectacular just in terms of the comic book movie genre, to me it felt like kind of a shot in the arm, like a reminder that the movies don't have to be so completely formulaic, and how even kind of a small twist is just having like a hard R, like explicitly comedy focus, because it's weird, because that's always the criticism of modern Marvel movies, is that they're kind of big, jokey jokes, and they are, but Deadpool, I don't really know how to put it into words at the moment, but the Deadpool movies feel a lot more like explicitly comedies, as opposed to being just action movies that have a lot of comedy in them.
They're action comedies. The rest of the Marvel Universe tends to be action movies with a side of comedy.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
It's like meat and potatoes or meat with a side salad.
Yeah. And so, so it just felt, mostly, I think a lot of my positive reaction to Deadpool was, it sounds mean to say that it was because I had low expectations, but that was only part of it. I think the other part was just, like, novelty, and that, like, they don't really make superhero movies like this. Like, this is kind of fun and refreshing, which obviously is a big hurdle for the sequel to overcome, which is perhaps why it ends up being so weirdly serious a lot of the time, but I don't think it can really transcend that, and the freshness has definitely worn off for me. But it wasn't terrible. It was just mostly forgettable. A couple of fun sequences that I think they're gonna stick in my head, but mostly
Yeah, I'm gonna echo Jackson here for entirely different reasons. If you've listened to the podcast for a little while, you know that I have a history with comic books. I've read a bunch of them. I know a lot of the characters. I know how they interact. So when they announced a Deadpool movie, I was basically expecting one of two things. This is for the first one. I was expecting it to be like some sort of weird subversion of Deadpool and become fantastic, or I was expecting it to be a Deadpool movie and be a Deadpool movie, and we got a Deadpool movie. It was basically tit for tat exactly what I was expecting it to be, and that's not necessarily a knock on it. I was just hoping for a little bit of variation, I guess. That's not even the right way to put it. It was fine. The first one didn't do anything to wow me, but it didn't put me off. And so when they announced a second one, and it came out, and I left feeling pretty much the exact same way as I left the first one, just kind of for different reasons. The first one kind of maintained a solid identity of it's pretty decent all the way through. The second one for me kind of wildly fluctuated from really good, characters are really great, action's really interesting, comedy's landing, to it's not great here, I don't care about anything happening, let's move back to the people I like, to a middle ground of I see where the emotional heart comes from, I'm fine with it, this is fine. And so it really did even out in the very much same way that Deadpool 1 came out of, which was it's perfectly serviceable. There's nothing wrong with it. I enjoyed it well enough. It just, I don't know. I'm constantly left wanting a little bit more out of it. Before we do jump into spoilers, though, Jackson mentioned Kingsman 2 specifically. And we're going to be probably wrapping back around to that movie a lot, just because it works as a very good point of comparison. We'll probably get a little bit of spoilers from it, but I'm going to tell you this right now. If you haven't seen the movie, you probably won't. Go watch the first Kingsman if you haven't seen any of them. Skip the second one. You're not going to care about spoilers.
But do go listen to our excellent episode and discussion on Kingsman, The Golden Circle, that you can find at the same place you're listening to this episode.
Shilling within a podcast. This is a new level for us. But yeah, it actually, like, if you haven't listened to it yet, it will actually give some interesting context for what we're about to say, because we're going to start bringing terms in that we used in the initial episode and kind of comparing, contrasting how it all works out. It is an interesting backdrop for this episode, but not one that I would argue that you necessarily need to have, but would be interesting for a point of comparison.
And if you are one of our faithful listeners who have already listened to that episode, we're going to be talking about people burgers again, so get ready for that.
8 months. Get ready.
But before we get into that, because that's, I think, the crux of that discussion is going to come a lot later in the movie, I wanted to talk about the opening to this movie. We always start at the opening, but I think it's especially prudent here.
So confirm spoilers right now.
Yes, confirmed spoilers for this. Also an early spoiler for Kingsman 2. You don't give a fuck about Kingsman 2 if you haven't seen it. So, Vanessa, the love interest and kind of the emotional core of the first movie, is fridged in the opening minutes of this before the title even comes up. And side note, there was a James Bond credit sequence in this, which I'm not opposed to, because I kind of, one of the things that makes me smile in movies are elaborate title crawls. But I didn't get it. Like, were they just doing it to do it?
Oh, it's Deadpool. Yeah, they were absolutely just doing it to do it. Like, I was looking for themes related to that, but I'm pretty sure they just did it because they could.
Yeah, because I was thinking, since the girlfriend dies before it happens, I thought maybe they're like, oh, is it because James Bond is always, like, sad about his girlfriend's getting killed? But then it's like, no, the popular conception of James Bond is that, like, he doesn't give a fuck about the women he sleeps with. That's why, like, the movies are so misogynistic, and it's really just Casino Royale where they really explore that. Anyway,
and, like,
so
there's even a Flashdance reference in it that just kind of comes out of nowhere, so...
Yeah.
It's just there to be there.
So, non sequitur James Bond opening sequence aside, we have Vanessa getting killed, and I don't want to say that this is a new development, because fridging is a trope like as old as time.
And can you give us a quick rundown on what fridging is?
Yes. For those of you who may be unfamiliar, fridging is the concept where you take a character, usually a woman, usually a family member, like a wife, a sister, some character who has an important connection to the main character, and basically the only purpose of this character is that they die so the main character is motivated to go on their noble and, manly quest, because again, it's usually associated as kind of like a sexist trope. Like
and fun bit of coincidental irony, the term fridging stems from a Green Lantern comic book.
Oh yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Which, Green Lantern, Ryan Reynolds, there's a little bit of a connection there.
It's like poetry, sort of, they rhyme. But yeah, that's fridging. Basic rundown of the concept, and this movie does it in about the most like clear-cut example you can imagine. But why I wanted to focus on it was that just the trend I'm noticing with fridging has sort of changed when it comes to action movie sequels. Or maybe it hasn't changed. Maybe, like, there's a bunch of movies, like, from the 90s or something that I haven't seen or I'm forgetting about. But it's something...
I've changed.
Or maybe I've changed. Yeah, so... but it seems to be doing a double purpose here. Because, again, the classical purpose of fridging is, again, to serve as a catalyst for the motivation and development of the main character.
The rage.
The madness, the fever, the rage. And, just to spur on that character's journey. But now what I'm seeing or have noticed is that often characters will get fridged in movie sequels when the writer or director don't really know what to do with them, even when there might be a potentially interesting dynamic. Like, it feels like they're doing it for more reasons than just, like, shock value. It feels like they're doing it to, like, clear the board. Because, in this movie you have Vanessa, and, her effect on Deadpool, they do actually go out of their way to show Deadpool grieving, in a fairly surprisingly realistic way a lot of the time, which I think contributes to some of the tonal weirdness of this movie.
But also does play, like, to the benefit of the fridging. Like, the contrast that you're about to make, like, this movie plays it a lot better, just even by having him grief, and, like, Vanessa isn't totally gone. She does kind of recur throughout the movie and kind of does become a driving force, not because she is dead, but because Deadpool wants to be dead with her, not because he wants revenge for her so much, and it's interesting in that way.
Yeah, it's definitely not the worst example, and there are those interesting elements to it. But I think the reason I'm reminded of Kingsman 2 again is that Kingsman 2 did almost the exact same shit with Roxy.
Rip my girl Roxy.
Got done dirty by Kingsman 2, because this was a character who, even in that movie, they set up a potentially interesting dynamic between her and Eggsy.
They were such good friends.
Mm-hmm.
Like, genuinely, that's not even sarcastic. They had, like, the best relationship of that movie for the 3 minutes we had of them together.
They were total bros. It was great. It could have been a great setup for a lot of like character interactions going forward. But clearly, the writers, directors just didn't know what to do with her. Didn't know how to like fit her into the plot and still bring like all the other characters they wanted to bring back and have all those interactions. So they just bombed all the Kingsmen. They just got rid of them. Just
too interesting. Better put her back in her box.
No, exactly. And for me, this feels like kind of the same thing, at least at first, where we have sort of the scenario of Deadpool and Vanessa on like their anniversary are talking about like wanting to start a family, and like we're seeing these signs that the relationship is continuing to grow and maybe might be challenged in different ways in the first one. And it presented some interesting possibilities for the movie going forward, which is why I was surprised, but I don't think in the way that they wanted me to be when she died. I was surprised, but I was just like, oh, we're just wiping the slate clean so we can go back to like Deadpool antics and not have to worry about this like character development baggage, which again, to be fair, like a lot of good chunks of the movie are actually dedicated to the grieving process, the idea of Deadpool coming back and having a purpose. It ends up being an important part. So it's not the same situation as Roxy, where they pour one out for her and then she's literally never mentioned again. Like, they never spare another thought for her. So it's not quite the same, but it still feels like it feels almost like they're cheating. Like come on, like you have these characters that could have potentially interesting interactions that could grow in new ways. And again, it's Deadpool. I'm not expecting the greatest romance of all time here, but even in the first one they had there was some cute like something to their relationship. Like I remember a lot of people, because of the R rating and how like openly sexual that relationship was, and like just the way they interact with each other and the way that sort of like the writers and directors were allowed to play with it. Like a lot of people I remember ended up being pretty attached to that relationship, just because with that dimension there, that extra dimension, it made it feel more realistic. Whereas a lot of action movies, very sanitized, like as far as like relationships go, like sex is only ever like implied or made innuendos about, and that's not how most romantic relationships work. Not all of them, certainly, but that's a big component in a lot of romantic situations. So it's an element of the first movie that I remember responding pretty positively to. I haven't seen the first movie more than once in the theaters. But
like I think a big part of the relationship too, like I same boat. Like I really liked it. I thought it was a really solid relationship, and I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that like they were presented very equally. Like they made sure like Vanessa was Wade's equal. There was no like it's an action movie, so you almost expect like that almost male dominance behind it, and like it was explicit that Vanessa was his equal, that she wouldn't take shit from him, and like. As silly as it is, like there's a joke about him getting pegged by her, like literally getting fucked by her, that I think plays really well as like a clear indication that this is an equal relationship. Like this dynamic works both ways. And so like to fall into such a common trope as killing her immediately just kind of flies in the face of that idea of equality, you know? Like, it just, from what could have been very much like the man and the woman are both central points to this, it becomes the man is the important part, the woman died so the man can stand.
No, you're absolutely right. And I love the way that, like, with their relationship in the first movie, that, like, that power dynamic ends up getting, like, shifted and subverted, but again still feels very, very natural and, like, recognizably realistic. And I think, like, I don't have too much more to say about this particular element, aside from the fact that it was disappointing, except for I can't believe they had the gall in that I'm just remembering this now, in the James Bond credit sequence. They had the gall to say in the subtitles, like, "Whoa, bro, do you believe we actually killed her? Like, you weren't expecting that." Except,
God, that does make it so much worse, doesn't it?
Because it's literally, like, one of the most common tropes in all of media. Like, no, Deadpool, you're not clever for killing off the girlfriend. Like, it would have been a lot more clever to make her an important character still.
Well, see, if nothing else, we do know that... Did you stick around for the credits?
I did, yes.
So she's back. It's okay. They didn't actually fridge her.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was wondering was how, especially with Deadpool going back and assassinating Ryan Reynolds as he's reading the script. I don't know. I wasn't sure how to take the post-credit scene, as if it was, like, finger quotes canonical. Not that, like, any sort of canon matters in these fucking movies, because, like, Logan clearly doesn't take place in the same universe, and all this other stuff.
Yeah, like, there's at one point when they're in the house and they're like, "Where's the rest of the X-Men?" And there's a shot of, like, the 1960s X-Men closing a door. Like, there's James McAvoy with all his hair still and everything, and they close the door, and, like, that took place 30 years, 40 years prior to what is happening right now. There is no canon.
Yeah, no, they don't give a shit, and that's fine. I think that's fine, but I actually was not sure if we were supposed to, like, if that was just kind of the closing credits gag, or if or if Deadpool literally did that, because then, I mean, then, you know, there are some nice things maybe we can say about the, like, emotional development and, like, the character arcs. But then, like, if that is canon, then literally the whole movie was a big fucking waste of time.
We talked a little bit about this in the pre-discussion. I'm not going to dive into it, but, like, the time travel in this movie fucking sucks. And, like, it exists here, and, like, the problem with it is not that there are, like, too many rules or not enough rules, but the problem is that this is Deadpool. They can say fuck the rules, and they do, but yet it still sucks. Like, there's no consistency, and whatever. Time travel is not what we're here to talk about, because I can nerd out and talk about this for, like, the next hour and a half, but nobody wants to hear that.
Well, not only is there no consistency, I mean, I think this is at least a little relevant, but there's no, like, build-up either, and because Cable just sort of comes from the future, and, like, that he just does it, and then he's just there. And it's weird. It's weirdly sort of, like, understated, and like, that's the thing about this movie and movies like this, is that it always has the built-in defense of, like, oh, like, they were doing that on purpose to show how, like, silly, like, time travel is. And I'm like, is that really what they were doing here, or was the script just a mess?
I think it's a matter of, like, acknowledging that it is kind of a silly trope, but also not caring enough to work it out. Like, that's always been kind of my problem with, like, in-jokes and stuff like that, just across the board. Like, movies will make reference to, like, hey, this is a shitty thing that every movie does, but look at us doing it. But because we know it's there, it's funny now. Haha, do you get it? Like, that doesn't excuse it. If you acknowledge it and then change it, that's one thing. But, like, if you acknowledge it, call it lazy writing, and still do it, it's still just lazy writing. Like, that doesn't make it clever. That just means that you know you're doing dumb and are doing dumb anyway. What the fuck is the point?
Yeah, I guess, and I guess this just gets, like, this kind of starts getting into Cable. Before the movie had been released, I'd heard people talking about how, like Cable and Deadpool were like this classic pairing that worked really well because Cable was this like ridiculous straight man from the future with all this like cliche like sci-fi stuff, and Deadpool was Deadpool, so they played off each other really well. And I was kind of interested in seeing that. But like just with what you're talking about with the time travel and like Cable in general, like he didn't feel ridiculous or like straight-faced enough. Like he just felt like another character in a superhero movie. He didn't feel any more over the top to me than something like the Winter Soldier.
Yeah, he didn't he never reached the Drax from Guardians 1 levels. Like
yeah, or like oh god, or I'm thinking like the Arnold Schwarzenegger parody in The Simpsons. I don't even remember that guy's name.
Oh god, yeah, I know who you're talking about.
McBain. Yeah. I was expecting like McBain from Cable, and like what we got was just sort of another character in a superhero movie, and like they didn't play off each other super well. And again, he's another element that just felt weirdly straight face to me.
Like to pull from Movie Bob's review of it, he does indicate like this is a very traditional explanation of Cable, which Cable fucking sucks to begin with. He's not interesting, but like it plays it as interesting. Like he is supposed to be like an average superhero man who just like fights everything with violence and is gruff and angry and is mad about his dead wife and everything like that. But like it's just, I guess I always expect more from Deadpool. Like they never really seem to do that much with it. Like it does become like the underlying theme of violence versus non-violence, but at the same time he's just so like they almost made him too boring. Like
no, they made him too. I think they made him too understated. Like it's so strange. Like I see what they're going for, but it just doesn't feel it like the execution's just not there. I don't think to make that like a fun dynamic. Like I would have preferred something like McBain, or even something like
Cherry Crews. Oh god. Sorry, I might have feelings coming up here in a couple minutes. I think it slipped out a little bit first. Oh, I'm sorry. Continue your thought.
I honestly don't have that much more to say about fucking Cable. So do we just want to get into it? Do we just want to get at the meat of the matter?
Because we're talking about person burgers.
Here we go. Light up the grill. We're gonna make some patties.
That was fucking terrible, and I am keeping it in just to spite you.
That's fine. I'll accept your hate. I'll accept your. I'll shoulder this burden.
This is a sign of a good podcast is when the hosts start to go after each other and like intentionally sabotage each other. You're in for a good treat. So if you aren't aware of what a person burger is, if you haven't listened to our Kingsman 2 episode, in that movie, one of the characters forces two of her henchmen to fight to the death, and then has the one grind the other person up in a meat grinder, turn him into a burger, she grills him, and then feeds him to the victor. And it's weird, unnecessary. Like it's clearly supposed to be characterization of one of the big bad lady, but just kind of comes across as dumb. And
it's dumb because it's so transparent, like what they're doing. It's dumb because you know that they wrote that scene knowing that some like hot and spicy stuff happened in Kingsman 1, and they were like, well, people are going to expect something even spicier. What are we going to do? Like, how can we make this better? How can we make this bigger? How can we make this grosser? And then they came up with that, apropos of no sort of theme or character context. They're like, we have a villain, we're going to use this to show that she's bad and fucked up, and we're going to turn it up to 11. And that to me is the core of the person burger as a concept.
Yeah, we've essentially co-opted it to be something that feels unnecessary and over the top, usually violent in a movie that just kind of fuck it. It's bad. It's a bad scene.
And we're gonna get into a nice like knuckle dragon fight about semantics here. We're gonna really hash out where the boundaries are and what constitutes a person burger moment versus what is not. Because there's one moment in particular that it was Sean's least favorite part of the movie and was probably my favorite. So let's get into that.
Yeah. By now you have absolutely seen the trailer for it. You know that the X-Force is a part of it. You've got Terry Crews, you've got Peter, you've got Domino, and some other people. Who the fuck cares? Those are the big three. And Terry Crews is really only a big one for me because Terry Crews is the goddamn best, and anyone who says otherwise is a fucking liar. Fight me. So they spend a whole time establishing these people, and like one of the important things as they're establishing it is that Domino's superpower is to be the best person in this movie and just be fucking awesome and deserves her own movie. But beyond that, she is lucky, and they're arguing that, oh, luck isn't a superpower, it's not a thing, blah, 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 blah. Well, they go to jump out of a plane, there's a high wind advisory, and basically everyone except for Deadpool and Domino die. Domino succeeds and moves forward. Everyone else dies horrible, horrible, grisly deaths. And the crux of the scene, as Jackson put it, is to really kind of underscore Domino's powers, that she is lucky, that, you know, everyone else died horribly, and she is just luckily fine. There's nothing wrong with her, and it sets up a really great scene for the rest of it to go off of. Now, my argument for why this is a person burger, and no, it has nothing to do with the fact that I just really like Terry Crews and want to see him live and think would be a very good addition to the movie and would have been awesome in it. It has nothing to do with that, I promise. It's clearly, I have nothing against this because of Terry Crews. But no, it just, everyone dies, like, it spends a lot of time setting people up, and then they all just die horribly, and like, to kind of underscore, like, Terry Crews dies in the least horrible way. He gets hit by a bus, and like, yeah, it sucks, but like, I probably could have lived with it, like, kind of be like, oh, haha, it's a funny goof, but like, people just start dying in worse and worse ways. A guy gets sucked into a wood chipper, another one gets eviscerated on a propeller from a helicopter, Peter gets his arm acided off by one of the other dudes, and Brad Pitt suddenly becomes visible as he gets himself electrocuted, and it just, to me, feels really unnecessary, and I think they would have benefited from keeping at least some of them in there.
So my argument for why this moment would not be a person burger moment, independent of the fact that I am just a psycho who likes watching people get chopped up in movies, is that the way, I think that in terms of flow, in terms of like building,
I'm sorry. You've seen Tucker and Dale versus Evil, right?
Yes.
Oh my
yes,
god.
I have.
I just got the fucking scene. He dives headfirst into a wood chipper. I think it's a suicide pact.
Oh, okay. No, I mean, no, but that's a good example because that's kind of that movie. That whole movie is sort of this like comedy of errors, like farce, where things like escalate and escalate. And this moment is not nearly as clever as anything that happens in that movie, but it's kind of working off of the same principle because even as you say, it starts with Terry Crews getting hit by the bus, and that's sort of like an understated little death. And then it moves and sort of escalates, and then Peter lands, and he's kind of fine. And you think that maybe because he is the lame one without any powers, that, he's going to stay in and be kind of a jokey joke character. But then, like, they switch that, and, like, he ends up getting killed too. So there's a clear, in terms of the filmmaking, there's a clear, like, building block to this that I think makes it work better as a gag than just like dropping a literal person burger in front of you. But more than that, I think that that we have all this and immediately follow up with Domino's wonderful like Rube Goldberg luck action stunt scene. To me, that is the punchline of the sequence. Like, that is it's not funny because all these guys died. it's funny because all these guys died, and then this one character who everyone had been doubting up until this point, like, completely solos the whole operation with effortless ease in the most, like, slick way imaginable.
And see, you're not wrong in that regard. I just think that more than anything, the way that they're offed is, like, too over the top. And, like, as I said, like, clearly I'm a fan of over the top death. I just literally cited somebody jumping headfirst into a wood chipper in Tucker and Dale. But I just feel like because, like, we're introduced to these characters and we're made to like them and appreciate them, and, like, they're even playing off Deadpool already. And I think a big part of the reason why I wanted them to stay was because Deadpool needs people to play off of, and, like, up until that point he hadn't really had anyone interesting to play off of. So, like, I'm like, just keep some of them. Like, I genuinely do think Terry Crews would have been a very good foil for Deadpool. And the fact that, like, they just off literally all of them as we're getting to characters who could be interesting and could continue to present solid comedy is a bummer. And the fact that they just do them in such spectacularly gruesome ways is just not funny. It's just a thing that happened. Like, I'm not necessarily opposed to offing them in any way. Like, you know, present them getting tangled up in all their parachutes in the high winds, because, like, at one point they're all just kind of flopping around, and, like, it could have easily gotten all tangled up and then plummeted to the ground or something like that. Just like a Deadpool going, ooh, nobody's getting up from that type of thing. That would have been funny and clever, but instead we just get scene after scene of people that we're already kind of getting attached to just die 30 seconds after they're introduced, and it just kind of it wears on you.
I see now. I do agree. Even though I think that as a whole, like, this is where the movie started picking up for me. I started enjoying it more. I think when Terry Crews got hit by the bus was one of the only times I laughed out loud. And then, like, you know, immediately following with all the domino stuff, like, that's when the movie started picking up for me. Because until then, I thought it was, like, kind of unfocused and not really, the humor wasn't really doing it for me. But as far as the construction of this scene, I do think you bring up some valid points, in that I think that part of what makes it funny for me is that the point is that they're dying kind of like a dog's death. Like, they're really, it's a really, like, lame way to go out. And this is one area where legitimately the movie's poor CGI made it even funnier for me, where they all look kind of like toy soldiers, like being parachuted from the plane, like dangling in the back, like looking like children's plastic green men. And so I think that like, so that's sort of the joke. You know, if that's the construction of the joke, we have building up, like, the X-Force, like Deadpool hyping them up, like all these guys with cool powers. You have the one they underestimate, and then also Pete. And then they all die except for the person who they were writing off, and, you know, that's sort of the construction. But I think where you're right is that it would have been more funny if the scene was a little punchier, and I think that as far as, like, the level over the top, and this is why I would disagree with the Person Burger assessment, is that I didn't think that this didn't feel to me like it was any more over the top than anything else that happens in Deadpool, whereas, like, the Person Burger in Kingsman was very clearly pushing a line. Like, it was pushing it even further, but to me this is very comfortably within the realm of, like, over-the-top violence that we had seen in both of these movies. But I do think it would have been funnier if, like, all at once, very quickly, like, you know, maybe they tie into each other and, like, fall and get eaten by a shark or something. And well, because this is Deadpool, I think for it to land, it does need
an element of ridiculousness.
Yeah. And so, like, it was just a little punchier, because I laughed when he got hit by the bus, but then after a little bit I was like, oh, okay, I get it, yep. And then you know, the only surprising thing to me in the sequence was when Pete got acided, because I had assumed that, you know, it was gonna be, again, all the people with the good powers, finger quotes, were the ones who were going to die, and then the people who had been underestimated would continue to play a role. So I was a little shocked when Pete ended up dying, and I thought that was a good beat. But other than that, we went on just a little too long. Would have been funnier if they had just all if it was a little punchier, and then we move into sort of the kick-ass like domino sequence.
So here's where I think it actually does kind of push a line. Because you're right in that we haven't, like, this is not an unusual level of violence for Deadpool. But it is an unusual level of violence for Deadpool's cohorts. Because up until this point, like, we see Deadpool get the shit kicked out of him. But we know he's going to come back and be fine. Like, that's Deadpool. We watch him kill bad guys, and they're all bad guys, so, like, we just kind of shrug it off. But we're introducing they're anti-heroes, but they're still heroes, they're side protagonists and all that good stuff. So, like, to have them die off is a line, just a smaller segment of a line, I guess. That's a terrible way of putting it, but you get what I'm going for. Like, it's just that's on the opposite side. It's the heroes who are getting chopped up by a helicopter and chopped up by a lot of people get chopped up in this scene. What the fuck?
There's a lot of chopping up in this movie.
Yeah, but, like, it just, because I think it's the heroes who it happens to, like, I think that's where the line really is that we haven't seen heroes getting the shit kicked out of them like this in, I mean, I can think of, like, 1 or 2 movies, but usually it's because they've got healing factors or something like that. Like, the other one I was going to jump to was, like, Logan or other, basically Wolverine is the other guy who we see as a hero get shit canned like this a lot. But, like, they always regenerate. Like, we only ever see villains get this badly fucked. So I think it's just a weird line that it's the heroes this time, especially heroes dying of, like, essentially their own malpractice. Like, fucking Deadpool fucked up. Their blood is essentially on Deadpool's hands. So it's just weird in that regard.
Yes, and I agree. I think you're right in that that's definitely the crossing of a line, but I think, if we're talking about it in statistics terms, it's within the margin of error for how over-the-top violent Deadpool would be. So, like, I'm thinking, because when I think of a person burger, like everything, I'm gonna put it in Dragon Ball terms.
Of course. I would expect nothing less.
Absolutely. Got to bring it all back to Goku somehow. So, at the beginning of Dragon Ball Z, we see Piccolo blow up the moon, and that's sort of our baseline. Because it's that kind of show. And so later on, we see Frieza destroy a planet, and so that escalation from there, that is again crossing a boundary, and it's a significant boundary as far as, like, size and momentous, and far as, like, the moon isn't populated and doesn't have any consequences in this world, and the planet, like, the whole race is extinct. So it's a line that is being crossed, but it's still it doesn't feel totally far-fetched, far removed. And Frieza blowing up that planet is that's sort of where we top out in that series, because then the worst we see, I think, is, like, Boo blowing up a planet or something, and that's at the very end. So that's sort of the, like, within the margin of error for, like, the scale. Now, that's where I would put, as far as Deadpool goes, I would put the, if Deadpool chopping up some henchmen in some violent ways and getting the shit kicked out of him is Piccolo blowing up the moon, his friend, it happening to his friends is like blowing up a planet. It's an escalation, but it feels within sort of the ballpark of what the movies are about. Now, where I think, for me to want to qualify something as a person burger, it's got to go into that step beyond, where, like, at the beginning of Dragon Ball Super, the next big jump we have after seeing Boo blow up a planet is Goku, like, destroying the universe. And it's just such an astronomical magnitude of difference that the new baseline is just completely fucked. And for that, that's what I feel like the Kingsman 2 person burger was. Where there was no, like, filmmaking, cinematic, like, writing reason for it, other than just to be big and gross and shocking.
So what you're saying is that this is within the line, and a person burger is to go even further beyond.
Is to go even further beyond. Precisely! It can all be brought back to DBZ.
I see what you're saying, and like I do agree that I honest to God think it really does boil down to the fact that it is like allies that do get killed in this way that really turns it into a person burger for me. Like I don't necessarily know that it is outside of the scope of the movie as far as just like how people die, but I feel like it's so unusual to see allies die in that way within movies. Like it's especially played for laughs in that way. It's just kind of odd to me, and I think that's really where the person burger is going to get subjective based on where you see the line being.
Yes, I agree. I agree wholeheartly. And I guess like if I wanted to put it in as concrete terms as possible, for me, in order for me to qualify something as a person burger death, the only reason it exists has to be that it's gross. A gross death in and of itself does not a person burger make to me. It's about that context. And I think that with this scene, there's more than enough context, as far as creating an expectation and trying to subvert it, and setting up the domino scene, more importantly, that kept it from feeling too gratuitous to me. In fact, I will say this, even though this was a part that I enjoyed, what I will say about it is that I think it is sort of emblematic to the problem with making a Deadpool 2, or just making a sequel to an edgy comedy like this in general, is that aside from Peter getting killed, I completely called that that's what was about to happen, which is maybe another reason why I wasn't so off put by this, is that as soon as they started talking about the high winds, I thought that everyone was going to get killed except for Peter and Domino. Yeah, I was how was I forgetting your name? But yeah, so I thought everyone was going to get killed except the people they were underestimating, and so I was wrong about Peter, but I think that there were a lot of moments in the movie, a lot of jokes that I didn't laugh at, that or sequences that maybe could have been fun or funny, that were just too predictable, because so much of what the appeal of Deadpool 1, what it was kind of leaning into, was kind of this like shock value, like punk rock sensibility, like we're gonna do whatever the fuck we want and be irreverent and violent and silly, and we're not like your grandpa's superhero movie. And so you can really only pull that trick once before you start expecting it, before you start seeing its moves, and that the rest of the plot ended up being just a little predictable. And normally I'm not the guy who is going to dock a movie like too many points, so to speak, just because there were some things that I had seen coming. In fact, I like to encourage movies to like actually set up their payoffs and make sure that everything kind of makes thematic, like, character sense. But the problem with a comedy is that so much of the appeal of comedy comes from the unexpected. So when you're calling the punchline every time, it starts to lose a little bit of its luster. And I think that was a big problem for me running through the movie, that this scene maybe showcased a little bit.
I honestly think that that's probably a solid place to end this, because like I feel like we've really kind of touched on what we want to talk about, why this is basically a better Kingsman 2 in a lot of ways. Just like it does what Kingsman 2 wanted to do, but it does it better in pretty much every way.
The thing about these movies is that they're clearly a labor of love. I think they're a little shoddy in the production. They're not deep. They're not super meaningful, but they try a lot harder than you would expect a movie like this to give it credit for, like going for the emotional elements, even though that's a lot of the time what makes the tone weird or maybe what doesn't make it work. But I appreciate that, you know, this is clearly a passion project for Ryan Reynolds. Like, he's giving it his all, like, you know, really has fun with the character. Yeah, and
passion can honestly make any movie better. Like, even like that's why bad movies are good, is because they're clearly passion projects. And like, just seeing passion behind anything will absolutely elevate a movie from fine to good in a way, you know?
And I guess that might be the main difference between this and Kingsman 2, because there's a lot of stuff in this that feels, you know, again, weirdly earnest. Like the plot with, you know, we barely touched on, you know, the main villain, the kid, and, you know, there's a lot of stuff with him that I think works pretty well. I think it's just strange that the whole plot line feels like it's straight out of X2 or something, like very straight-faced sort of X-Men plot, just with Deadpool. And but I appreciate that they tried going for like the metaphor with like the conversion therapy and like trying to put some meat on it and make the movie elevate the movie a little bit, because there's clearly that attempt. Whereas in Kingsman 2, very obvious that they were just like, well, what was a thing in Kingsman 1 that people enjoyed? They sure liked that scene where Colin Firth killed the people in the church. Let's have action. Oh, we have to have a villain with some quirks. We'll make another quirky villain. Oh, they like their social commentary from the last one, right? We better make another over-the-top social commentary. I just felt very, very perfunctory, very much like a checklist. Whereas this one, again, even though it feels a little stale, like it can't, the surprise, the novelty can't have the same effect the second time. They do try to keep it fresh, and for that, I very much appreciate Deadpool 2.
Well, before we wrap up, I do have one last thing I would like to bring in, and specifically it is a segment that we've kind of done in the past, but I'm officially going to call it a segment now, because I'm going to talk about my shitty movie-going experiences.
Oh, no!
So, if we're this far, obviously this is a huge spoiler for everything. At one point, Deadpool loses his powers, and, like, that whole scene when Cable first shows up is not really ever played for laughs. Like, it's very visceral and violent, and you watch him in pain the entire time, right? Like, there's never really a funny moment in that. Except in my theater, where people found a lot of it really funny for no explicable reason. Specifically, at one point when we're not really sure, like, his collar gets pulled off, which is the thing suppressing his powers, but, like, we're not really sure if it got pulled off in time, and he could just be straight up dead, because he falls on a table, and, like, his back breaks in, like, 4 places, his neck is clearly snapped, it is unpleasant to look at, and, like, it's in a very quiet shot, and, like, you hear the cracks, and, like, it's not funny. It is clearly supposed to be a moment of what the fuck is happening. A solid third of my theater guffawed at that, and I was just confused and a little frightened.
Oh, that's pretty bad. You know what's funny? My theater, and I think I'm curious to see what the public reaction to this movie has been, because I don't know at all. I haven't really talked to too many people about it. Because granted, I went to a smaller showing in like the middle of the day on a weekday, but the crowd was pretty dead in my theater. Like, there weren't a lot of laughs. Whereas I remember in the first one, everyone was like busting a gut over everything. Like just completely like couldn't help themselves from laughing. And, you know, the first one ended up being such like a runaway hit. I guess I'm just curious. That's what I was thinking about while I was in the theater, and sort of like, watching the jokes not land in real time. I was sort of wondering what the general public thought of this one, if the magic worked twice on, average moviegoer. So have to look into that, I guess.
Well, my general public absolutely loved everything, including things that were clearly not jokes. So
I guess question answered. I don't know why. Maybe it is the fact that I live in like a shitty small town, but like I very rarely have super terrible theater going experiences nowadays. Really, it's only when I go see like horror movies. Horror movies are always the worst crowds.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I think part of it too is like I've kind of, because the theater I usually go to the Gateway, I haven't been going to as much just because of distance, and like I'm doing so much right now. I'm looking for convenience, and there's an AMC and like something else by me, and like I've been going to those two, and I can't help but wonder if like going to big name theaters is impacting the crowd in some way. I hate to sound snobby, but I'm sure it is.
I mean, if you think about like someone who goes out of their way to go to the independent theater that's going to be showing like art house films and foreign films in addition to like the big old blockbusters, making that attempt. I mean, you got to figure not to make a judgment on people for not, enjoying movies the right amount, but like certainly the person who goes and knows about the independent theater probably cares more about movies than the person going to see like the biggest Marvel movie at the AMC. So
yeah, for sure. Not to shame anybody. That of course I'm just going to occasionally bitch about things that got in the way of a tense moment or something like that in movies because it just seems to keep happening.
Remember when people clapped during the light speed charge in Last Jedi?
Oh, that hurt me so much. It was so, All right, look, I've been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. Come yell at me about why my opinions on person burgers are wrong, or why I should just let people laugh at clearly tense moments in movies and make me quietly upset. If you want the rest of my stuff, I do Twitch streams and stuff like that. You can find all that on my website, isortof.com.
And I've been Jackson Keller. You can come make fun of me for my bad jokes over at Jackson J. Keller on Twitter. I've been replaying Metal Gear Solid chronologically, so you will usually tweet about things I've been doing because I can never consume media in a way that isn't like a project. So I've been playing Phantom Pain, so if you want some hot takes on that 3-year-old game, yeah, come along.
Well, hey, I've actually been playing Metal Gear Solid 1 on my stream, so I guess if you're really in the mood for some Metal Gear, you got 2 of us playing it right now.
Oh!
What was that laugh?
I don't know.
If you want to keep up to date with what we're doing on the podcast, you can follow us at BADH_cast. I tweet low effort stuff all the time, occasionally memes. Sometimes I try and construct careful tweets, but usually it's just like, fuck it, follow us.
Do it already, you won't.
As always, we would like to thank Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide Alternate Take off the album High Octane Low Expectations. And also shoutouts to 25yearslater.site.com for hosting us. They're a cool group of people. They do a lot of stuff about like TV shows mostly. Big focus on David Lynch. I know they're talking a lot about the return of Twin Peaks because this is the 1-year anniversary of season 3. So go check that out. Next week we'll be talking about Solo. So I guess, kind of pertinent that we joked about the Lightspeed dash in Last Jedi because I'm going to go probably relive that.
Time to Lightspeed dash your way out of the theater.
Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go